create a 10-second animation that uses 3 of the 12 principles of animation. So what I did with this was I did solid drawing, and I did squash and stretch, and I also did exaggeration on the facial expressions. So I started out by drawing my character, and the way that I made sure that I was doing solid drawing is I tried to make my character look three-dimensional. So that means that instead of making his head like a flat circle, I made his head like a round sphere. The only difference being that you see how I drew his eyes along a curved surface to create the illusion of three-dimensional space. The other way that you can achieve that is through overlapping. So for instance, notice the shirt as a curved line, but also notice when I do the arm, it overlaps the body, and when I do the body, it overlaps the other arm. And by doing that, it gives it a sense of three-dimensional space. The bottom of the shirt is also curved, and in that way, I'm able to create a feeling of solidity. Now, I made my person too low on the page, so I'm going to retrace them onto another piece of paper, but notice I'm going to pull the paper down so that I have enough room to add the legs, and I'm now tracing him over with Sharpie. Now, in this case, I'm not going to be adding the face because I'm going to be using exaggeration on the face, so I'm not going to add them right now. I'm going to be able to change the facial expressions. So there's my solid drawing. I'm now adding the legs, the feet. You can see how on the second piece of paper I've got a lot more room at the bottom to add the legs. And you can see that because I used those curved lines for the shirt, because I used overlapping, the body has a sense of three-dimensional form. Now, I'm just closing all the little gaps so that it's easy to use the magic wand tool later to get rid of the background. Now, I'm going to add the faces. I cannot use Sharpie because it's going to bleed through onto the other paper. So I'll use pencil at first, and I'm going to be using exaggeration. So I'm making a surprised face. I'm also going to change the actual shape of the head to exaggerate the head. And that way I'll create an exaggerated sense of surprise. And now I'm going to do another facial expression. And this one is going to be angry. So in addition to making angry eyes and an angry mouth, I'm also going to exaggerate the shape of the head and make it all very angular and pointy to give it an exaggerated feel of that the person's experiencing anger. So that's my second principle of animation that I'm doing is exaggeration. So I'll now give the person a happy look. And again, I'm changing the shape of the head to make them look really happy, and I'm exaggerating. Look how huge that smile is. So now I'm going to take the person out from underneath the back, and I'm going to outline those 3 faces. I don't want to bleed through, so I'm going to just pull this out of the way. And I'm going to outline the faces real quick with Sharpie. And then I'm going to photograph them. Now, when I photograph it, I need to photograph the heads and the body on the same photograph to make sure that everything's the same size. So I'm going to put them together first before photographing them. Once I'm done photographing, I'm going to email that picture to myself and open it up on the computer. So there I am in my email. I'm going to open it up. I'm downloading it, and then I'm going to open it up in Photopia. Now, part of the problem with this picture is that the exposure is different. There's sort of a hot spot at the top, and it's very dark at the bottom. So I have to play around with that in Photopia in order to get a decent picture. So you're going to see how I problem solve. I had to sort of make it up as I went along. I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do with that picture that's so dark at the bottom. So I tried using curves, I tried using exposure, and the problem was that the top part of the picture was at a different exposure level than the bottom. So when I tried adjusting those things, one part might look right, but the other part looked washed out. So let me show you how I solved that problem. This part's a little tricky, so I'm slowing the video down. I had to treat the two different parts of the picture as if they were two separate pictures because the exposures were so different. The top was very light and the bottom was very dark. So what I ended up doing was I used the rectangular marquee and I cut out the top part and I did edit, copy, and then I did file, new, create. I didn't have to pick the size, edit, paste. It automatically picks the right size for you. So now I did select, color range, and I picked the black. So now just pick the black, and then what I ended up doing once I selected the color range was I did select, modify, expanded it by 1 pixel, and then I did edit, fill, and I filled it with black. And then I did edit, copy, and there's my perfect faces, okay? I did edit, paste. So the other faces ended up being too light, so I ended up going back down to that other layer and deleting them. So now I've got the faces correct. Now let me go back and do the exact same thing on the body. Remember I said I was treating them like they were two different pictures because of the exposure. So edit, copy, I did a rectangular marquee. I did file, new, create, edit, paste. And then I changed the contrast, I changed the exposure. Now I'm going to just select the black part. Hit OK. So I did select color range. And I did edit, fill, and I filled it with black, and then I copied it, and then I pasted it. And I got rid of the previous versions that were not as sharp. So now I've got this very sharp black outlines, and I can start playing around with assembling my person. So I'm going to just go to the layer that has the faces in it, and I'm going to do a cut and then a paste. And then I'm going to move that face onto my guy. Now you can see because I changed the head that I have to go back to the layer where the guy is. And I'm going to use the eraser, which is hidden under the brush tool. I'm going to make the eraser a little bigger. And I'm actually just going to erase the edges of the head so I can put the new head on there. So now I'm going to use the move tool. I'm putting the new face on there. And when I'm satisfied, I'm going to hide that layer. And I'm going to repeat the same activity with the next head and then the next head. So I'm going to cut. I'm going to paste. I'm going to move it, put it in place, hide that layer, and then go to the last face, cut, make sure you're in the correct layer, edit, cut, edit, paste, and move it into place. Now I've got all 3 facial expressions in place. So I don't need the rest of my canvas, so I'm going to use the rectangular marquee, and I'm going to do image, crop, and then I have to resize the entire document. So I'm going to do image size, and I want it to be about 5 inches tall, and I'm going to hit that change so that the width also changes, but I'm going to change the DPI to 300. So when I'm done, I'm going to have a much smaller, crisper document. that fits into the wick editor. Okay, so now I'm going to hide 2 of the 3 faces, and I'm going to do File, Export as PNG. And there's my happy person. I'm going to now do the same for my angry person and my surprised person. So I'll have 3 PNGs. The problem is that they have those white backgrounds on them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my downloads, and I'm going to rename them. They're not in the format that I want them to be in right now because they have those white squares around them. So I'm going to rename them. Let me just rename this one happy, this one surprised, and this one angry. And then once I've done that, I'm going to open them up again one at a time in Photopia, and I'm going to magic wand out the background. So magic wand is hidden under the quick select tool. So I just do File, Open. I find the magic wand, I magic wand out the background, and I hit File, Export as PNG, and it's going to rename it. Instead of happy, it's going to be happy with a parentheses 1 after it. This is going to be angry with a parentheses 1 after it, and this is going to be surprised with a parentheses 1 after it to distinguish the 2 files. So just so I don't get mixed up and accidentally mess up and use the ones that have that white box around them, I'm going to go back into my downloads and I'm going to delete the ones that I don't want. So I'm going to look in the downloads, date modified today, and I'm going to delete the 3 original ones. I'm going to keep the ones that have that 1 in parentheses after it, because those are the newer versions. So those are the ones that I want. Now I'm going to go to the wick editor, and I'm going to, this is very important when you open the wick editor, make sure you change it to the larger size, that 1080, and then you're going to upload assets, and you're going to pick the 3 images that were modified today. Now at this point, you know how to do the onion skinning, and you know how to add in the person, and you know that you already did solid drawing, and you already did exaggeration. But my question is, how do you do squash and stretch? And in that case, I would take your layer and I would drag it down. I would add a new layer, and then I would drag this layer down so it's underneath the other ones. And now I want to mess around a little bit with the timing. It's going too fast. So you can actually drag out each animation cell so that it slows the animation down. So see how I'm changing the level, I'm changing the layer, I pulled it down, and now I'm making each animation cell last a little longer. And I'm going to keep it on the surprised face for about 60 frames, which is 5 seconds. I changed the fill color to pink, and I locked the bottom layer with a person in it, and I'm now going to the top layer, and in that top layer, I'm adding, using the shape tool, copying and pasting and making ever larger circles, so it looks like the person is blowing a bubble. And here's where I can add in my squash and stretch. I can move the bubble around, I can rotate it, I can squash it, I can stretch it, and there's my 3rd principle of animation, squash and stretch. So I'm just going to keep on copying and pasting it as I make my animation longer. And of course, I only have about 5 seconds of animation if I do all 60 frames. But I'm just going to keep on doing this, and eventually I want the bubble to pop. So that's going to be a little bit tricky making the bubble pop. I've got to think about that. I'm going to use the eraser and I'm going to erase part of it, but I can't break up those 3 shapes because the Wick-Editor thinks they are one shape. So what I'm going to do instead, see, there really isn't any way to break up these 3 shapes. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to erase 2 out of the 3 shapes. I'll just make my eraser a little bigger. You can slide it to make it a little bigger. I'm going to erase 2 out of the 3 shapes, and then I'm going to go back to the previous frame, and I'm going to copy and then paste that shape again. So I'm going to go back to the previous frame where it's still a whole shape. I'm going to copy it. I'll select it, copy it. And now I'm going to go to the next frame, paste it, and I'll just pull it off to the side, and I'll cut it apart, and this time I'll just save another piece of it. So I saved the edge of it, and I'm going to now go to the previous frame. I'll copy it again, and I'll paste it, and then now I've got another piece of it. So I've got kind of the top, I've got the bottom, and I've got the middle, and it kind of looks like it's blowing apart. Now I want to select all 3 of these shapes, so I'm going to just drag the cursor across them to select all of them, copy them. I'm going to go to the next frame, paste them, and this time I'm going to move them. I can move them, I can rotate them to really make it look like my bubble is exploding. Okay? So I'm going to keep on doing that till the parts of the bubble go off the edge of the page. I'll copy them, paste them, and then pull them apart. Copy them, paste them, pull them apart. And I think I want to end, it looks like he's still surprised. I want to end with him being angry. So I'm going to grab some of the angry frames and put them in at the end until I get to the end. Now what I'm doing is I hit the Shift key and I selected multiple frames. I selected from the first frame to the last frame. By holding down the Shift key, I can select multiple frames together, copy them, and paste them on the end. So I can repeat the activity. I can repeat the frames over and over again to repeat the motion of the bubble exploding. And then at the very end, in the last frame, I can add the angry guy. And I can add the angry guy for a few frames so that it looks like he's angry at the end. Now I'm going to do File Export. Let me just test out my animation. Looks good. I'm going to export it as an MP4. And once I have that MP4, I just want to take a quick look at it, make sure it looks okay. And then I'm going to open up WeVideo. So, once I'm in WeVideo, I log in using my school account and I upload media. So you click media, you click upload, you import the media, and then you're going to click project. So you hit plus, you're going to create a new project. And then once you're in the new project, you select the media and you're going to create the video. You pull the media down onto the timeline, and now I can actually change the timing of it. I'm going to actually click on the clip, and I'm going to go to the little clock. First, you click on that little pencil. You go to the little clock, and I'm going to change the speed so it's just under 10 seconds. I think I got 9.44 seconds, something like that. So I'm going to adjust the speed, and then I'm going to hit Save Changes. And what I really liked was at the very end where the guy had that angry look on his face. So once I've adjusted the speed, I decided that I really want to hold that last frame for a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull that video clip down onto the timeline again, And I'm just going to trim it by just pushing in from the left-hand side until the only thing left is the guy with his angry face. Okay, and then I'm going to click on that. I'm going to click on the pencil. I'm going to go to the timing again, and I'm going to slow that clip down so that I can look at his angry face for just a little while and really register in my mind that he's angry, that his bubbles keep popping. And now I've told a little story with just a few pictures. So when I play it, I notice that right at the very end, he looks happy. When I play the video, it pops, and then for some reason, right at the very end, he's got this happy face. So, yeah, I don't like that. So I'm going to go to the very end of the video, and I'm going to just push in with my cursor to clip it at the very end. And now I'm ready. Now, what I'm going to do when I'm happy with my animation is I'm going to hit finish, and then I have to export it. Now, when you export it, make sure that you export it in HD, not ST, and that you click as your destination your Google Drive. And you should see it appear very shortly in your Google Drive. It'll be a minute, but if you click recent, it should show up. So we're just waiting. There it is. It shows up. You're going to download it. You're going to check it out and make sure it looks okay. And then you're going to submit it to Google Classroom, and you have finished your midterm exam. So that is how I was able to create an animation using 3 of the 4 principles of animation. I had solid drawing, I had exaggeration, and I had squash and stretch. By copying and pasting multiple frames together and by slowing the video down in WeVideo, I was able to create 10 seconds of animation.